Random compliance check, said the head auditor with a smirk when I returned from lunch to find 3 suits rifling through my workspace. Behind them stood Veronica, arms crossed, barely containing her satisfaction. The office gossip had warned me this was coming. She'd been whispering about concerns with my reports for weeks. Discovering anything useful? I asked calmly, setting my lunch tote down. I didn't bother hiding my small smile. The lead auditor glanced up. We've found some irregularities in your quarterly forecasts. Have you checked the methodology appendix? Page 16. I leaned against the wall, watching them scramble through papers. Their expressions changed completely when they realized what they were actually looking at. Page 16 contained my meticulously documented parallel accounting, tracking the official numbers against the actual ones. 2 sets of books, side by side, but not for embezzlement, as my vindictive peer had hoped they'd find. Instead, it revealed how she had been systematically inflating performance metrics across 3 departments to secure larger bonuses. I hadn't started this war. For 6 months, she'd taken every opportunity to undermine me, scheduling meetings when I couldn't attend, altering my analysis after submission, questioning my conclusions in front of executives. She was untouchable, the CEO's favorite who had climbed the corporate ladder through connections rather than competence. These worksheets are quite thorough, mumbled the youngest auditor. I'm very detail-oriented, I replied. You'll notice each irregular adjustment is matched to an authorization code. The system logs who enters those codes. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Veronica's face drained of color. This is absurd. She's obviously fabricated. When did you first notice these discrepancies? Interrupted the senior auditor, suddenly professional. 3 months ago. At first, I thought they were mistakes. I pulled out my phone and tapped it. I've just sent you access to my private server with 2 years of backed up reports. You'll find the pattern begins 14 months ago, coinciding with the new bonus structure. What they didn't yet understand was that my vindictive peer wasn't my actual target. She was merely the pressure point I needed. Before I continue with what happened next, I want to thank you for tuning into my story. If you're finding this account of corporate betrayal and strategic revenge intriguing, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to hear more stories like this one. Your support means everything, and I promise the revelations coming up are worth sticking around for. Now, let's get back to that moment when everything changed. My name is Adira, and I've always been the person who notices details others miss. Not because I'm trying to catch people, I simply see patterns everywhere. Numbers speak to me in ways people never could, which is why I became a financial analyst. For 3 years, I'd been quietly excelling at my job while watching others take credit for my work. You've been tracking this for months without reporting it? Asked the auditor. I did report it, I said quietly, twice to my direct manager and once to the executive committee. Let me guess, those reports never reached you? The silence confirmed it. I hadn't just documented Veronica's manipulations. I documented the deliberate suppression of my findings by leadership. The chairman of the audit committee was summoned within the hour. By end of day, my workspace had become command central for a full corporate investigation. Veronica was escorted out, but she was just the beginning. Over the next week, the operation expanded, not because I was some crusading whistleblower. I had no interest in that role. I simply understood the corporate ecosystem better than anyone else. When the dust settled 2 months later, the executive committee had been restructured. The new leadership team needed someone who understood both the problems and solutions, someone with unique insight into the company's actual financial health versus its reported one. That's how I found myself in charge of implementing the new corporate governance framework. Veronica? She became the public face of the scandal, while I quietly gained authority over the reformed systems. My revenge wasn't getting her fired. My revenge was becoming the person they couldn't function without, the woman who now approves the bonus metrics for everyone who once dismissed her concerns. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming indispensable to people who once thought you were disposable. But this is just the beginning of my story. The aftermath was far more complex than anyone could have imagined, and what happened next would shake the foundation of not just our company, but the entire industry. Let me take you back 6 months before the audit, when I first noticed something wasn't adding up in our quarterly projections. It started with a casual comment during the weekly financial review. Veronica had presented results showing a 12% growth in our Eastern territory, a number that contradicted everything I knew about that market. When I quietly questioned her data source after the meeting, she gave me a practiced smile. Don't worry about the methodology, Adira. Just focus on your small corner of analysis and leave the big picture to those of us who understand business strategy. That dismissal rang in my ears for days. I had graduated top of my class with dual degrees in finance and data analytics. I'd worked twice as hard as anyone else on the team, yet was perpetually overlooked for promotions, while Veronica, with her marketing background and executive connections, kept climbing. That night, I began digging deeper into our company's financial reporting system, not out of vindictiveness, but curiosity. What I discovered shocked even me. The discrepancies weren't simple rounding errors or optimistic projections. They were systematic and intentional alterations that formed a pattern across multiple departments. All roads led back to Veronica, but the trail didn't end with her. Every altered report had been reviewed and approved by someone in upper management. This wasn't a lone operator. This was systemic. I documented everything meticulously, building a parallel tracking system that compared the real numbers with the reported ones. For 3 months, I watched the pattern continue, gathering evidence while saying nothing. I knew what happened to whistleblowers. They were thanked publicly and blacklisted privately. My first attempt to report it was to my direct manager, Bennett, who listened with concern, took my documentation, and promised to take appropriate action. 2 weeks later, I was reassigned to a peripheral project, and my access to certain financial databases was mysteriously restricted. My second attempt went to the executive committee through a confidential reporting channel. The result? A company-wide memo about potential system glitches in the reporting software and a mandatory training on accurate data entry. That's when I realized I wasn't just fighting Veronica, I was fighting an entire culture of deception. And to win, I needed to change my approach entirely. I began cultivating relationships with people in internal audit, legal compliance, and the board's oversight committee, not by reporting what I knew, but by asking innocent questions about processes and controls. I became known as someone interested in regulatory compliance, boring enough to be harmless, knowledgeable enough to be useful. Meanwhile, I watched as Veronica grew increasingly bold with her manipulations. She began taking credit for my analyses when they proved correct, and blaming me when projections went wrong. She scheduled important meetings when I had dentist appointments on my calendar. She, accidentally, left me off crucial email chains. The final straw came when I overheard her in the break room telling our division head that she had concerns about Adira's attention to detail and suggesting that perhaps my cultural background made precise financial reporting challenging. That night, I constructed the final piece of my strategy. I knew Veronica had been watching me collect lunch from the same cafe every Wednesday. I knew she had connections to the audit team, and I knew exactly what would happen if she thought she could catch me with improper documentation. I left the most damning evidence in plain sight, labeled it clearly, and waited for the trap to spring. When I returned from lunch that Wednesday to find auditors at my desk, I wasn't surprised. I was ready. What happened next would transform not just my career, but the entire power structure of the organization. And it all hinged on what those auditors would find in my meticulously organized files. The following week was chaos. The audit team took over a small conference room and requested interviews with everyone from my department, nerves frayed as rumors spread through the building. I maintained my composure, responding to questions factually, and providing additional documentation whenever asked. Veronica, meanwhile, had been placed on administrative leave, corporate speak for, "We think you did something terrible, but legal hasn't cleared us to fire you yet." On Thursday morning, the CEO himself requested my presence in his office, a corner space with windows overlooking the city. It radiated power and inaccessibility. I'd never been invited there before. "Adira," he said, gesturing to a chair, "I want to hear directly from you what's happening with these financial discrepancies." I noticed he didn't call them manipulations or fraud. Interesting choice of words. "The audit team has my full documentation, sir," I replied. "I've been tracking inconsistencies in our financial reporting for months. Yes, I've seen your reports. Impressive attention to detail." He leaned forward. "What I want to know is why you kept this information to yourself for so long before the audit." The The trap was obvious. He was trying to make this about my failure to report, not about the actual fraud. With all due respect, sir, I didn't keep it to myself. I reported my concerns through proper channels twice. I have copies of those reports with receipt timestamps. The audit team has those as well. His expression tightened. Reports can be misinterpreted. Adira, context gets lost. That's why I was so thorough with documentation. The context is quite clear when you see the pattern of authorization codes. He stared at me for a long moment. Do you understand what's at stake here? Not just for Veronica or individual executives, but for this entire company. I do, I said quietly. Our last 3 quarterly reports to shareholders contain material misstatements. That has serious regulatory implications. And you think exposing this helps anyone? His voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. I think accurate financial reporting is non-negotiable. The question isn't whether to address it, but how. He nodded slowly, seemingly reassessing me. The board meets tomorrow morning. I'd like you to present your findings directly. As I left his office, I knew this wasn't a victory. It was an escalation. The CEO was giving me enough rope to either save the company or hang myself. That night, I barely slept. I prepared my presentation with meticulous care, emphasizing solutions rather than blame. I understood corporate politics well enough to know that people who only identify problems rarely survive the aftermath. The boardroom the next morning was tense with unspoken questions. 12 executives seated around a gleaming table, the CEO at the head, and me, standing before them with my presentation queued up on the projection screen. Miss Adira, began the board chair, an elegant woman named Winona, we understand you've uncovered some concerning patterns in our financial reporting. Yes, ma'am. However, I've also identified how we can address them with minimal disruption. For the next 20 minutes, I walked them through what I'd found: the systematic manipulation of performance metrics across multiple departments, the approval chain that had allowed it to continue, and the potential regulatory consequences. More importantly, I outlined a structural solution that would prevent similar issues in the future. When I finished, silence filled the room. Finally, the CFO spoke. This is comprehensive work, Adira, but implementing these controls would require a significant restructuring of our reporting systems. It would, I agreed, but less costly than an SEC investigation. The CEO cleared his throat. Thank you for your presentation. The board will discuss this matter privately now. I was dismissed, sent to wait in an adjacent room while they deliberated. An hour passed, then 2. I sat calmly, reviewing mental scenarios of what might happen next. When the door finally opened, it was Winona who entered, not the CEO. We've reached a decision, she said, sitting across from me. The board has voted to implement your recommended controls and reporting structures with some modifications. Relief washed through me, but I kept my expression neutral. That's good to hear. There's more. We're announcing a restatement of our financials for the past year, citing methodological improvements rather than corrections. Corporate speak for admitting mistakes without admitting wrongdoing. And Veronica? I asked. She and 3 senior managers have resigned effective immediately. Non-disclosure agreements have been signed. Winona studied me carefully. The board is creating a new position, Director of Financial Integrity. We'd like you to fill it, reporting directly to me rather than through the normal chain of command. The offer was unexpected. My plan had been to document the fraud, protect myself from retaliation, and perhaps negotiate a better position during the fallout. This was far more than I'd anticipated. I appreciate the offer, I said cautiously. What exactly would this role entail? Overseeing the implementation of your proposed controls, quarterly reporting directly to the board's audit committee, and a seat at the table for all executive financial decisions. A seat at the table. After years of being ignored, overlooked, and undermined, they were offering me real power. I accept, I said simply. What I didn't know then was that I'd just stepped into a far more dangerous game than I'd been playing before. The first hint came 3 weeks later. I was working late, implementing the new reporting systems, when my computer pinged with an anonymous email. You only caught the decoys. The real numbers are worse. Much worse. I stared at the message, a chill running down my spine. Was this a trap? A test of my integrity? Or was someone reaching out with genuine information? I traced the email to an anonymous remailer service. Whoever sent it didn't want to be found. After careful consideration, I replied with a single line, "Prove it." The response came within minutes. A spreadsheet showing a pattern of transactions I hadn't caught. Customer contracts with inflated values, revenue recognized before it was earned, expenses hidden in subsidiary accounts. If these numbers were accurate, the fraud wasn't just about bonus manipulation. It was about keeping the company's stock price artificially high, while certain executives quietly sold their shares. That night, I discovered a hidden trail that led not just to Veronica and a few managers, but potentially to board members themselves. The rabbit hole went deeper than I'd imagined, and I was no longer certain who I could trust. The next morning, I found Winona waiting at my workspace when I arrived. "Good morning, Adira," she said pleasantly. "I'd like to discuss the progress on your implementation plan." "Of course," I replied, casually locking my computer screen. "Would you prefer to talk here or in your office?" "Actually, I thought we might go for coffee. There's a place across the street with excellent privacy." As we walked, I mentally reviewed everything I knew about Winona. Board chair for 3 years, background in corporate law, reputation for ruthless efficiency, no obvious connection to the suspicious transactions I'd found. But that didn't mean there wasn't one. Once seated with our drinks, she got straight to the point. "You've received communication about additional financial irregularities." Not a question. "May I ask how you know that?" I kept my voice calm despite my racing heart. "Because I sent it," she replied. "I needed to know if you'd pursue the truth, regardless of where it led, or if you'd stop once you achieved your promotion." I studied her face, looking for deception. "And what did you conclude?" "That you might be exactly what this company needs." She slid a thumb drive across the table. "This contains evidence of financial misconduct that goes back 5 years and implicates 3 board members, including our CEO." I didn't reach for it. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because I've spent 2 years trying to clean up this company from the inside, and I'm running out of options." She paused. "The quarterly board meeting is in 3 days. If we don't act before then, they'll vote to sell the company to a private equity firm that will dismantle it completely. And the employees? Massive layoffs, already planned and documented." I finally picked up the drive. "What exactly are you proposing?" Her eyes met mine with unwavering intensity. "A coalition. You have the financial expertise and the moral authority after exposing the first layer of fraud. I have the legal background and board connections. Together, we might be able to save this company, or at least ensure that those responsible face consequences." "Why should I trust you?" I asked bluntly. She smiled slightly. "You shouldn't. Not completely. But check what's on that drive, verify it independently, and then decide." As she stood to leave, she added, "One more thing, Adira. There's a reason they created that director position for you so quickly. They're setting you up as the fall person if this all comes crashing down." I spent that night analyzing the files Winona had provided. The evidence was compelling and horrifying. The financial manipulation went far beyond what I'd initially uncovered. This wasn't just about inflated metrics for bonuses. It was systematic fraud that had kept the company artificially profitable for years. And right there, buried in the transaction logs, was proof that put everything in a new light. The suspicious timing of stock sales, the hidden subsidiaries, the offshore accounts, but most disturbing was what I found in the planned acquisition documents. My name, listed as the executive who had overseen and approved the very financial systems now under scrutiny. Documents I had never seen, bearing what appeared to be my signature. They weren't just setting me up as a scapegoat. They'd been planning it all along. The question was, what was I going to do about it? And could I really trust Winona? Or was she playing an even deeper game? I had less than 48 hours before the board meeting that would determine not just my fate, but the future of thousands of employees. What I didn't know was that someone else had been watching from the shadows, someone with their own agenda who was about to throw everything into chaos. The morning of the board meeting, I arrived at the office before dawn. The building was empty, except for the cleaning staff and security. Perfect. I needed uninterrupted time to prepare my countermove. I'd spent the previous day verifying every piece of information on Winona's drive, cross-referencing transactions against databases I'd built during my investigation. The evidence was solid, pointing to multi-year fraud orchestrated by 3 board members, including our CEO. but something still felt off about Winona's sudden alliance. Why approach me now? Why not earlier, when I first uncovered Veronica's manipulations? As I was reviewing the fabricated documents with my forged signature, my phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. Parking garage, level 3. Now, come alone or lose everything. I stared at the message, weighing my options. This could be a trap, but it could also be the missing piece I needed. The parking garage was dimly lit and eerily quiet as I stepped off the elevator to level 3. I scanned the rows of cars, alert for any movement. Smart of you to come, the voice emerged from behind a concrete pillar. Bennett, my former manager who had buried my first report, stepped into view. He looked terrible, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes. What do you want, Bennett? To warn you, you're being played. He glanced nervously around the garage. Winona isn't your ally. Explain. The board split into factions months ago. One group led by the CEO wants to sell to private equity. Another faction, led by Winona, wants to restructure and take the company public with a higher valuation. And the fraud? Real. But both sides were involved. He pulled out his phone, showed me a document. This is the actual acquisition plan. See who benefits most from the sale? I scanned the document, my blood running cold. Winona's name was at the top of the compensation list. She stood to make over $30 million from advisory fees alone. She approached you because she needs a public face for her counter-strategy, Bennett continued. Someone with credibility after exposing the first layer. Someone. Expendable. I finished. But why are you telling me this? You buried my initial report. Shame flickered across his face. Because I was stupid and scared. I thought playing along was my only option. He handed me a thumb drive. This has everything. Both factions, all the fraud, communications, proving who knew what. A complete picture. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't, he said, echoing Winona's words from before. But I'm leaving the company today. My resignation letter includes a partial confession. Not enough to implicate me in criminal charges, but enough to support your claims, if you need it. As he turned to walk away, I called after him. Bennett, why now? He stopped, shoulders slumped. Because sometimes, you realize you've become someone you never wanted to be. He didn't look back as he disappeared into the stairwell. I returned to my office and spent the next 2 hours reviewing Bennett's files. They confirmed my suspicions but added crucial context. This wasn't just about cooking books for bonuses or even stock manipulation. Both board factions were positioning for a massive corporate restructuring, using fraudulent numbers to support their competing visions. And I was meant to be the sacrificial lamb, regardless of which side won. By 8:30 a.m., executives began filtering into the building for the 9 a.m. board meeting. My phone lit up with a message from Winona. Meet me in my office. 8:45. I replied, in a meeting. See you at the boardroom. I wasn't giving either faction a chance to align their stories before the main event. At 8:55, I gathered my materials and walked calmly to the boardroom. Inside, 11 board members were settling into their seats. The CEO at the head, Winona to his right. 2 empty chairs remained, one for the CFO, who was running late, and one for me. Ah, Adira, said the CEO with a practiced smile. We weren't expecting you until the financial integrity portion of the meeting. I thought I'd join for the full session, I replied pleasantly, given how interconnected our financial systems are with today's topics. His smile tightened. Winona caught my eye, her expression unreadable. When the CFO arrived minutes later, the meeting began. First came routine business, approval of previous minutes, operational updates. Then the CEO cleared his throat. As you know, we've been exploring strategic options for the company's future. Today, we'll be voting on the acquisition offer from Stellar Partners. Several board members nodded enthusiastically. These were the CEO's allies. Before we vote, interjected Winona, I'd like to present an alternative strategy, one that I believe offers superior shareholder value through an independent IPO. The room divided visibly, half the board leaning toward Winona, half toward the CEO. Just as Bennett had described, perhaps we should hear from our Director of Financial Integrity first, suggested Winona, gesturing toward me. Given the recent adjustments to our reporting, her perspective seems relevant. This was it. The moment both sides expected me to play my assigned role, to either expose the CEO's faction, as Winona wanted, or present a sanitized version of events that allowed the acquisition to proceed smoothly, as the CEO expected. Instead, I opened my laptop and connected it to the projection system. I appreciate the opportunity to address the board, I began calmly. Over the past weeks, I've been implementing new controls as directed. During this process, I've uncovered some concerning patterns that all board members should be aware of before voting on any strategic direction. The CEO shifted uncomfortably. Adira, perhaps we should discuss your findings privately first. With respect, sir. Transparency is essential given what I've discovered. I clicked to my first slide, a complex diagram showing both factions of the board and their connections to various financial irregularities. What exactly are you presenting? Demanded a board member from the CEO's faction. Evidence of systematic financial fraud orchestrated by members of this board, from both strategic camps. I moved through my presentation methodically, showing transaction records, altered documents, and communication logs that implicated individuals on both sides. The room erupted in denials and accusations. The CEO stood, face flushed with anger. This is completely inappropriate and potentially libelous. I'm ending this meeting. Actually, I said, raising my voice slightly, you lack the authority to end it. I turned to the stunned directors. 10 minutes ago, I submitted comprehensive evidence to the SEC, the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and 3 major financial news outlets under whistleblower protection. Complete silence fell over the room. Additionally, I continued, I've engaged independent counsel who has filed for an emergency injunction against any board action until investigations are complete. Winona recovered first. Adira, we discussed a strategic approach. We discussed your strategy, Winona, not mine. I switched to a slide showing her compensation package in the proposed acquisition. You neglected to mention your $30 million incentive to control the narrative. The CEO sank back into his chair, ashen-faced. You've destroyed this company. No, I countered. I've saved it. My submission to authorities includes a restructuring plan that preserves jobs and operations while removing compromised leadership. A soft knock on the door interrupted us. The company's general counsel entered, followed by 2 agents in suits. FBI, announced one, displaying credentials. We have warrants to secure documents and electronic devices related to an ongoing financial crimes investigation. What followed was controlled chaos. Agents secured the boardroom while additional personnel fanned throughout executive offices. Board members were separated for preliminary questioning. Some responded with outrage, others with resignation. I sat quietly, answering questions when asked, providing access to my evidence when requested. By evening, the CEO, CFO, and 4 board members, including Winona, had been escorted from the building. In the days that followed, the full extent of the fraud became public. Both factions had manipulated financial reporting for years, creating a house of cards that would have eventually collapsed regardless of which strategic direction prevailed. The only difference would have been who profited from the collapse. The company entered a court-supervised restructuring. An interim board was appointed by major institutional shareholders, with oversight from regulatory authorities. 3 weeks after the board meeting, I received a call from the lead independent director, inviting me to interview for the position of Chief Compliance Officer. The role would place me on the executive team responsible for rebuilding the company with transparent governance. I accepted the interview but made no promises. The day before my scheduled meeting, I visited Bennett at his apartment. He'd become a cooperating witness in the federal investigation, trading testimony for immunity from prosecution. They've offered me a senior position, I told him. Chief Compliance Officer. He nodded slowly. Are you going to take it? I considered the question carefully. The company needs someone who understands where all the bodies are buried, and you'd have the power you deserve after everything they put you through, he added. It's not about power, I corrected him. It's about building something that actually works, something honest. So you'll take it? I smiled. On one condition, that they implement every single one of my recommended controls and transparency measures, without compromise. 2 days later, I accepted the position, not as revenge, but as reconstruction. My vindication wasn't seeing others punished, satisfying as that was. It was creating a system where skill and integrity mattered more than connections and manipulation. where people like Veronica couldn't rise through deception, and people like me wouldn't be silenced. 6 months later, we emerged from restructuring as a smaller but stronger company. When reporters asked about my role in exposing the fraud, I gave the same answer. I just did what anyone should do when they see something wrong. I documented it, reported it, and refused to be silenced. The truth was more complex, of course. I had played the long game, gathering evidence meticulously, understanding the politics before making my move. I had turned manipulation against the manipulators. But my most powerful weapon hadn't been cleverness or careful planning. It had been integrity, the one thing they never expected from someone they'd underestimated for so long. Thank you for following my journey from underestimated analyst to chief compliance officer. If you found value in my story of corporate resilience and strategic thinking, please hit that like button and subscribe for more insights into navigating complex workplace dynamics. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand your ground against workplace manipulation? Your experiences matter, and this community grows stronger with every shared perspective.